Welcome to Mission Gathering Charlotte. This community is for you. If you grew up in the church and have lost your faith, if you are in a moment of deconstruction or reconstruction, if scandals, politics, and hate have led you into doubt, if the stories of this faith raise doubts and curiosity in you, our time together is not about trying to fix you. You are not broken. Our journey in this life is not about erasing doubt, but embracing them. For it is only on the darkest night we can see the stars. Life's journey is hard enough, so we don't think you should have to make this journey alone. So if you are Asian, Latinx, Black or White, Indigenous, if you are male or female, trans or non-binary, if you are 3 days old, 30 years old, or 103 years old, if you've never stepped foot in a church, or if you are Buddhist, Roman Catholic, agnostic, or are a lifelong evangelical, if you are single, married, divorced, separated, or partnered, if you are straight, gay, lesbian, asexual, or bisexual, if you are a Republican, Democrat, Independent, Socialist, or not registered to vote, if you have or had addictions, phobias, abortions, or a criminal record, if you own your home, rent, live with your parents, or are homeless, if you are fully abled, disabled, or a person of differing abilities, you are welcome to join us on this journey to share our sacred meal at the table of grace. Happy Sunday, and welcome one and all.
No conditions, you are loved. We cannot say enough. You completely belong. No, we cannot say it enough. You are saved to be who you are. No, we cannot say it enough. So come to the table, there is a place for you. Come to the table. Come to the table, just as you are. No exceptions, welcome home. We cannot say it enough. You're not on this road alone. No, we cannot say it enough. Nothing to prove, you can let down your guard. We cannot say it enough. So come to the table, there is a place for you. Come to the table. Come to the table, just as you are. Come to the table, there is a place for you. Come to the table, there is a place for you. Come to the table, just as you are. Just as you are. Just as you are. There's no fear, no fear in love. There's no fear, no fear in love. You are saved to be who you are. Nothing to prove, you can let down your guard. And come to the table, there is a place for you. Come to the table. Come to the table, just as you are. And come to the table, there is a place for you. Come to the table, there is a place for you. Come to the table, just as you are. Just as you are. Just as you are. Just as you are. just as you are.
So I wanted to give a little background information on this parable before we read it, because a lot of people talk about how this is a hard parable to understand. So let's give some background information so maybe it'll be a little easier for you to understand before we read it. So Jesus is telling this parable, and it's the fourth in a series of 5 parables. And these parables, these stories that Jesus is telling, were in response to his peers, the Pharisees, right? We talked about that. Those are like his uncles and his friends, grumbling about the kind of people that Jesus was hanging out with. So he tells the first 3, teaching those who would have ears to hear about how God goes after the lost, restoring relationships. So that's a passion of God's, that God will always go out to restore relationships. And he tells the story of the lost sheep, the story of the lost coin, and the story of the lost sons. And then the last 2, Jesus starts with, there was a rich man. Both of these stories are about wrong relationships with money. Or maybe better said, the prioritization of the acquisition of wealth and money over creating right relationships with our neighbors. Now, the people who would be hearing these stories originally would understand a few things that maybe we don't understand today. First was that the entire region, like all of the Mediterranean, is under occupational control by the Roman army. Rome's military force was there to exploit the natural resources and the labor resources of all of the Jewish people living in the Mediterranean world. Rome's occupying forces couldn't live there without having access to a few things. The first is bread. Romans needed bread. They needed wine because wine was something safe to drink. And they needed olive oil because you don't want to just not dip your bread into something. Who wants dry bread, right? Rome paid for these supplies through heavy taxation of the occupied peoples. And they would claim justification for these taxes by saying that they were there to bring civilization to backward parts of the world and to be a peacekeeping force. Does that sound familiar? Now, something else the original hearers would have been living, what they would have known, was that Jesus in the land that he and his people lived in was divided into 2 geographical regions. The first region was a place called the Galilee. Now, Galilee was kind of like a frontier area. It wasn't as developed. It was boom towns and small farms, people homesteading and trying to make a living out of living in a new space. They were gambling that it would pay off, that they would be able to work this land and that their families in the future wouldn't have to work quite as hard. But that meant that they were rich in land, but not so much in hard currency. They were giving themselves enough food for their families to eat and then selling off kind of what the excess was to try and put some money away. The second region was in the south. And then we call that Judea. That's where Jerusalem was, like the capital was. Far to the south, there were people from old money families, people that had been there since Cyrus the Great had let the Jewish people come back to their land. And they had weathered the storms of the Greeks coming in and the Maccabees and all of the stuff that had happened, and they had held on to their money and maybe even profited more from that. And so they had lots of currency. They owned lots of land in the south, had lots of servants, maybe even lots of slaves. They dealt in commerce and trade. Even if they didn't work the land themselves, they took the fruits of the land and traded it for hard currency. You see, but when Rome came to these rich families in the south, these old money families in Judea, they could pay their taxes. But not only could they pay their taxes, but as suppliers of the goods that Rome needed, and as people with lots of hard currency, they could even negotiate their tax rate, where they were paying less taxes than people who had a lot less than them. The farmers and the makers and the risk takers and the gamblers up in Galilee, well, they didn't have that kind of cash to pay all of these Roman taxes. So the rich cousins from Judea, they would come up and say, listen, we've got a deal for you. We'll pay your taxes. You won't owe the Romans a thing. But here's the deal. You have to sign over your land to us. But we're not heartless. We'll let you live on this land. Work it, farm it, bring in the harvest. But all you owe us is the the lion's share portion. All you owe us is as much as we can get out of you each year, while your family barely scrapes by. So when Jesus talks about there was a rich man, this is the kind of man who he means. And these rich men, they didn't do the dirty work themselves. They didn't go and collect their portion of the grain and the wine and the olive oil, but instead they would hire these people called stewards, or maybe your translation says manager, right? They were the middlemen. They would manage the estates of the rich. But beyond just managing it, the manager's job was to try and squeeze as much profit out of these poor, destitute farmers who had lost everything. To squeeze as much profit as he could out of them, so that his master back south, living in their palatial villas, could have more and more and more money. So this is the backdrop of our story. Let's read this together. Jesus also said to the disciples, "A certain rich man heard that his household manager was wasting his estate. He called the manager in and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give me a report of your administration, because you can no longer serve as my manager.' The household manager said to himself, 'What will I do now? That my master is firing me as his manager. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too proud to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I am removed from my management position, people will welcome me into their houses.' One by one, the manager sent for each person who owed his master money. He said to the first, 'How much money do you owe my master?' He said, 900 gallons of olive oil. The manager said to him, 'Take your contract, sit down quickly, and write 450 gallons. Then the manager said to another, 'How much do you owe?' He said, 1,000 bushels of wheat. He said, 'Take your contract and write 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted cleverly. People who belong to this world are more clever in dealing with their peers than are people who belong to the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to make friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful with little is also faithful with much. And the one who is dishonest with little is also dishonest with much. If you haven't been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? If you haven't been faithful with someone else's property, who will give you your own? No household servant can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be loyal to the one and have contempt for the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Like I said before, this parable was Jesus speaking to the Pharisees. And this parable is written for those who find themselves in the middle. Those who aren't super poor, but those who aren't like obscenely rich either. If you're watching this broadcast, you're probably one of the people that this was written to. You're probably somebody who's in the middle, who this story was supposed to speak to when it was written and who it's calling out to speak to today. You're like the manager. The manager switches teams, though. That's what this story's all about. He switches teams. He'd worked his whole life. He'd given so much of his years on this earth for those at the top of the economic ladder, thinking that somehow his service would allow him to have security and peace of mind. He tried to climb that greasy pole so he could be one of the rich people at the top. But as he found himself sliding down to the bottom, he realizes on the way down that he has more in common with the poor people that he'd been exploiting for his master than he ever did for his master. He's seen the injustice that has been done to them because he's seen the injustice that is being done to him. Why does it take that sometimes? Why does it take sometimes for us to wake up to see the injustice happening to ourselves before we can recognize it happening to someone else? I think that's part of what's going on with so many of us who feel like we're stuck in the middle. is that if we're honest with ourselves, it takes going through something bad to wake us up, to have solidarity with those who had things bad for much longer and for way too long. Money isn't evil because money isn't even real. It's a lie we've all bought into. But our relationship with money, our relationship with wealth, with capital, with whatever you want to call it, our relationship can be wrong. It can be evil. You see, Jesus was telling stories. Jesus was living his life. Jesus was trying to show us how to establish what he calls the kingdom of heaven. And that kingdom has its own economic system, its own just economic system. But our system today is much like the one of Jesus' day. You see, the economic system in his day and in ours sees people in the natural world as resources that can be exploited for profit. And that profit gets concentrated at the top of the pyramid. Almost all of the world's wealth today in our economic system, in our global economic system, almost all of the world's wealth is held by just 11 families. Think about that. While the rest of us fight for our portion of whatever's left over, while we complain and we bicker about forgiving student loans or paying for school lunches or whatever it is that people are mad about today because they had it harder than anybody else ever and ever and ever. They walked uphill both ways in the snow all the time as they paid off everyone's mortgage in their town, right? We hear everyone complain about anything that tries to help someone out when we're all at the bottom fighting for the table scraps of what actually lives out there in abundance. The system we live in, the social conditioning we have has given us the wrong relationship with money. Because money isn't evil in and of itself. Jesus doesn't say that here. But Jesus advocates it's money that should serve creating relationships, creating interdependent relationships between each other. It's money that should serve our communities. It's money that should serve to make sure people don't go without. It's money that should serve us, all of us. Money should serve the community as a whole. It should be something that creates stronger bonds between us because we're taking care of each other's needs. But more often, though, we allow our relationships to serve our own fight for wealth, or what we perceive as wealth, the table scraps from those 11 families. Our relationship with money is the tail wagging the dog and not the other way around. We're so like the Pharisees. You see, in their time, they had equated honor and holiness with prosperity. If you had the money to do everything you were supposed to, if you kept a roof over your head and you had the right clothes and you lived in the right place and the kids went to the right school, then you were an honorable person. But if you were poor, you must have done something to deserve that, or God must not like you, or you must have been cursed by something, or you made bad choices, or your parents made bad choices, and somebody was responsible for you being poor, but it wasn't them because they were the good guys. But the truth is that the Pharisees always had more in common with the poor and the outcasts that Jesus hung out with than they ever had in common with the rich people in their palaces in the hills of Jerusalem. I wonder who it is that we think we have something in common with. That ego boost that we need, those people that we need to feel like we are like them, rather than realizing we're all at the bottom together. Who are you chasing after that won't give you the time of day, or won't think about it when you have slid into poverty, or you need somebody to help you, or your car broke down? Who are you wasting your resources and time on who could not care less about you? Who are you chasing after because somehow you think that they are going to lift you up into some new sort of status? All the while ignoring and forgetting about those with whom you have true solidarity, who you have true camaraderie, who can actually relate to if you get past your own biases about what you think you look like or how proper you think you are. What keeps me up sometimes is I wonder if we can stop pretending. Wonder if we can stop pretending that we don't understand this parable. Because I could have just read you this parable and you would have understood it. I didn't have to give you the background information for you to get what's going on here. Because we're all participating in a part of the grift, the same grift that was going on in this story. What if we could truly stop pretending we don't get it? And if we could truly begin to see that money should serve our relationships, and that relationships goes beyond with just our species, but with our creature kin and this planet itself. I think if we could do that, maybe we could actually turn back climate collapse. Maybe we could actually solve some systemic issues of poverty within our nation, within our world. What if instead of being afraid to admit that we love our money, we began to confess that to one another, and we began to use our money to create deeper love with the people around us? I think there would be major changes in this world if we could be truthful about our relationship to money. If we could begin to try and serve just the one master instead of constantly trying to chase after two. A mission gathering and friends, and in a time like this, as we go into an election season, do we have the ears to hear the words of Jesus? It's my hope that you will hear these words, not my words, but Jesus' words this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whenever you're watching this. That you will turn your eye inward and you will open your heart to listen, so that you can be trusted with a true inheritance of the world filled with abundance. So that your children and their children will have a world worth living in. So that generations yet to come will be able to experience this wonder of this wild life. May you have the ears to hear. May it be so. And amen. Hey everybody, Pastor Andrew here. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that today's message was one that maybe helped you see the world a little bit differently, or helped you see beyond some of the things that you've been struggling with to a brighter future. If you could today, I would ask that maybe you donate, so that we can keep giving messages like this to the world, so that we can keep doing the things that we need to do in our community. Because right now we need your gifts. It's hard for nonprofits everywhere. And as a nonprofit who's fully funded by you, it's tight right now. So maybe you could send $20 this week, or maybe you could send $10. Maybe you've been waiting to give a gift that larger than that, or you're trying to get things ready for finishing out this year's charitable donations. And we'd be glad to send you whatever letters you need, whatever documentation you need, but we need your gifts. So for the gifts that you will give and the gifts that have already been given, I offer this prayer of dedication and thanksgiving. Gracious, loving God, you lack for nothing, and you want us to be a part of that world and economic system of abundance. Allow these gifts to be used for the building of your kingdom, so that we can use them as a means to create better relationships with our neighbors and ourselves in our world, so that we may not serve money, but that we will use money to be serving your purpose. We thank you and we love you in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen. Thanks, y'all, and we'll see you next week.